This episode of the CyberWire is made possible in part by SpyCloud. Stolen data circulating on the criminal underground is fuel for data breaches, account takeover, ransomware attacks, and online fraud. Your biggest security risk might be a breach or malware infection outside of your control that leaks the data of your users. SpyCloud constantly recaptures and analyzes new data from the criminal underground, powering solutions that proactively protect over 2 billion employees and consumers worldwide. Learn how to make recaptured data your best defense at spycloud.com/cyberwire. That's spycloud.com/cyberwire. Russian cyber operators collect against domestic targets. More details on the Viasat hack. Ukrainian hacktivists say they can interfere with Russian geolocation. Spring for Shell is another remote code execution problem. The Remcos Trojan is seeing a resurgence. Malicious links distribute via Calendly. Johannes Ullrich from SANS on attack surface detection. Our guest is Fleming Shi from Barracuda on cybersecurity champions. Phishing with emergency data requests, and Lapsus may be back from vacation. From the CyberWire studios at Data Tribe, I'm Dave Bittner with your CyberWire summary for Thursday, March 31st, 2022. Citing research by Malwarebytes, Bleeping Computer describes a large-scale phishing campaign directed against potential Russian dissidents. It seems to be an internal security measure intended to keep an eye on dissatisfaction with the war and to offer a measure of insurance against the possibility of insurrection or a coup d'etat. A malicious RTF file attached to a phishing email carries either a Cobalt Strike or PowerShell payload. Employees of certain agencies are of particular interest to those carrying out the campaign, and it's interesting to see how many of them work for either educational organizations or regional authorities. Viasat has provided more information on the cyber attack against ground terminals that knocked its satellite internet service offline in Ukraine and in other parts of Europe during the early stages of the Russian invasion. The company says it's working to fully restore service to affected customers and that it's taking other steps to shore up its resilience. Those steps it's prudently not sharing since it doesn't wish to give the attackers insight into Viasat's own defenses. Defense One reports that Ukrainian operators, hacktivists of the Cyber Ukraine group, say they've found weaknesses in Russian tactical battle management systems that render them susceptible to disruption by interfering with their ability to use GLONASS systems. GLONASS is the Russian equivalent of the more familiar U.S. GPS. They also hint that they're exploring ways of directly interfering with Russian artillery computers and that they've identified some possibly exploitable weaknesses in those systems. This wouldn't be surprising. Russia did it to the Ukrainians a few years ago. During the early stages of the Donbas insurrection, Russia fomented and supported. CrowdStrike reported that Russian operators were able to gain access to Ukrainian fire direction systems. Russia's war against Ukraine has yet to spill over in any significant ways to other sections of cyberspace, but the U.S. remains on alert, C4ISR reports. And of course, cyber threats continue to be active in and around the active theater of war. Google's threat analysis group has published an update on cyber threats in Eastern Europe. Some are criminal and some are state-directed. Among the state-directed activity is an uptick in Chinese cyber espionage seeking to collect intelligence on the war. Sonatype and Contrast Security report confirmation of the Spring for Shell remote code execution 0-day. It's a vulnerability in Spring Core, a widely used framework for building Java-based enterprise applications, and a proof of concept has been circulated online. Praetorian researchers say that the exploit bypasses an incomplete patch for CVE 2010-1622, which is an old code injection vulnerability in Spring Core that affects Spring Core on Java Development Kit version 9 or later. It's serious, but as HelpNet Security notes, it's not grounds for panic, and remediations are available. Security firm Morphosec has discerned a resurgence in the Remcos Trojan. The phishing emails represent themselves as payment remittances from financial institutions, including Wells Fargo, FIS Global, and ACH Payment. The fishhook is a malicious Excel file. Security firm Inky this morning described how criminals have been able to abuse Calendly, a freemium calendaring hub, by inserting malicious links into event invitations. The crooks are using brand impersonation to distribute a credential harvesting link. Many of the invitations are arriving from compromised email accounts, which has enabled them to slip by some defenses. Bloomberg reported late yesterday that forged emergency data requests last year induced Apple and Meta to surrender basic subscriber details, such as a customer's address, phone number, and IP address. None of the companies who were affected by the scam are without experience in handling requests from law enforcement, and they all have policies in place to prevent this sort of thing from happening. But emergency data requests are a bit different. They're issued in special circumstances by law enforcement agencies when they're concerned about a clear imminent danger, and they can be issued without the usual legal and judicial review. So urgency, here as in so many other cases, seems to have served to lower the victim's guard. Researchers suspect that some, perhaps all, of those responsible for the caper were minors in the UK and the US, some of whom may also be involved with the Lapsus group, others with the Recursion team. And finally, speaking of Lapsus, the gang, or someone claiming to be the gang, seems to have returned from the vacation it took after 7 of its alleged script kiddie leaders were arrested last week. TechCrunch describes the group's attack on software consultancy Globant. Lapsus has pushed a 70-gigabyte torrent file in its Telegram channel that the gang claims to have stolen from Globant. The hackers also say their take included Globant's corporate customers' source code. And now, a word from our sponsor, LookingGlass Cyber, a global leader in cybersecurity. There's never been a more serious time for U.S. critical infrastructure sectors to shore up their cybersecurity defenses than right now. While ensuring internal cybersecurity solutions are blocking and detecting nefarious activities is critical, security leaders also need to understand their external attack surface. This outside-in view highlights the vulnerabilities and exposures that threat actors can see on your network. Gain a deeper understanding of vulnerabilities and exposures currently seen across the financial sector, along with a crosswalk of these items to Russian threat actors. Access your complimentary copy of the Financial Sector Cyber Profile at lookingglasscyber.com/cyberwire. And we thank Looking Glass Cyber for sponsoring our show. As the focus on security and software development continues to increase, some say it's time to assign an official cybersecurity champion role to someone on the development team. Fleming Shi is Chief Technology Officer at Barracuda Networks. He shares his perspective on security champions.
To me, it's actually for every department that has anything to do with software development or any type of operational components. The champion's job is not in a way to, block things, but actually assert cybersecurity practices, what we call the best practices in the very early stages of either design or planning. So it's less of a behind the scene person, but more of a involved in a conversation in initial architecture of doing any type of digital work. So to me, for engineers, for example, cybersecurity champions will be the ones that identify certain behaviors and maybe identify certain data processing, behaviors or software behaviors, even vendors that that needs to be used, or maybe open source projects that's going to be included in the design. Basically have a conversation around that. So build up the security awareness or compliance awareness. Sometimes, it could be in the form of describing certain security practices or policies. Sometimes could be also identifying the classification of the data. Could it be critical, in terms versus, data that's intransient? Those type of, conversations needs to happen early. So the champion his job is to nurture and really kind of drive awareness in the very early stages of the software development cycle.
It seems to me like a certain amount of diplomacy would serve someone well in this role as well. So the team doesn't see this person coming and say to themselves, "Oh boy, here comes here comes cybersecurity champion Bob or Betty, and let's all run the other way."
That's right. I 100% agree with you. So there's a lot of diplomacy required, or basically soft skills required to actually do this type of work and do it successfully, because we have talked about this in the past, where security sometimes is viewed as a disruptor in innovation, right? So I think you want to innovate with security in mind, and that's what we need to kind of weave together and get the team working together. Sometimes the cybersecurity champion could actually seed from existing development team or operations team, where they're starting to build up that level of awareness and understanding. So even if you do this early, there's going to be much more clearer path for you to actually get to market, right? Because if you do this early, you will have a plan for how data is processed. And you can also talk about all the open source components and why you chose this path, because it's better for security and compliance, right? So once you have all those in place, actually the job gets easier towards them, because you have transparency, you have information, you have the ability to really kind of, ensure your legal department or to your customers, you have certifications that you can get to quicker. So I believe doing it upfront is better, instead of kind of just, build a whole bunch of things, then do some pen testing and hope it's okay. You know what I mean?
Right. How do you measure success? How do you, know that the programs you put in place are being effective?
I think that's a great question, partially because it's something new. I will say you have to really kind of apply it based on the context. So for software development, obviously adding security, one way I will measure is adding security towards the end, maybe going through month and months of pen testing back and forth and fixing things, versus if you do it early, you probably have a shorter development cycle to get to market, right? That's one way to measure it, is basically doing it early, having everything ready. By the time you're getting to the point where you're doing the pen test and the outcome is amazing. We actually had that kind of experience at Barracuda, where we were surprised how secure the product is once it's done, because we had applied security all along, from architectural perspective to design to implementation to all the functional requirements and all the things added together. So point there is that you can measure based on the success of delivery of the software. The other one is obviously using metrics that you can gain along the way from testing security on top of, like, pen testing is absolutely still required. And from that point on, you just get to that agile component of the development cycle, and hopefully security doesn't become a friction for you.
That's Fleming Shi from Barracuda Networks. And now, a word from our sponsor, Axonius. As IT and security pros, we can all agree on two things. Complexity is increasing, and traditional asset inventory approaches no longer cut it. The only path forward? Challenging what we think we know. That means saying goodbye to the old way of doing things and saying hello to Axonius. The Axonius cybersecurity asset management platform correlates asset data from existing solutions to provide an always up-to-date inventory, uncovers gaps, and automates action. Axonius gives IT and security teams the confidence to control complexity by mitigating threats, navigating risk, decreasing incidents, and informing business-level strategy, all while eliminating manual, repetitive tasks. Visit axonius.com/cyberwire-complexity to learn more and try it free. That's axonius.com/cyberwire-complexity. And I'm pleased to be joined once again by Johannes Ullrich. He is the Dean of Research at the SANS Technology Institute and also the host of the ISC Stormcast podcast. Johannes, it's always great to have you back on the show. Wanted to touch today on attack surface detection. What can you share with us?
Yeah, so one problem a lot of smaller businesses and enterprises are struggling with is what are we exposing to the internet? Now, for enterprises, that usually means hiring some fairly expensive service and software in order to do that for you. But for smaller businesses, there are a couple of cheap or even free options that you can use in order to figure out what are you exposing to the internet.
What kind of stuff do you recommend?
So actually my favorite, even though that requires maybe a little bit more work kind of set up, is Seek. Seek is really an intrusion detection system. It sort of summarizes everything that's sort of happening on your network, but it has a couple neat reports or logs it generates of all the known services it sees, new hosts it sees in your network, or also software, so software versions and such. It does that by looking at the banners. If you want a little bit simpler setup here, there's something called Security Onion, which is a bootable Linux CD, also as a virtual machine that sort of has Seek and a bunch of other tools pre-configured for you to not just detect attacks, but also any new services that you have. On the more active side, doing occasional scans with tools like Nmap of your network aren't a bad idea. Of course, in order to do that, you need to know what IP addresses you have. For a smaller organization, it's usually not a big problem. For enterprises, this can be a real issue. One question here I have also for people who are doing this, how you're dealing sort of with people working from home. Are you scanning your home users occasionally? Because the kid may have set up some gaming platform or whatever in the same network that's now being exposing ports here.
Yes.
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 Yeah, you have seen it happen.
Yes.
But of course, there are a couple of legal and technical issues you may want to you don't want to take down the kid's gaming platform.
No.
I know service level agreements with home networks are always a little bit tricky there.
Right.
And then there are actually some services that actually do it for you, like Shodan, Census, and Risk IQ and such collect some of that data. Some of it you can get for free, some of it relatively cheaply. But you basically tell them, hey, these are the IP addresses that I have. Just send me an email whenever you find something new with that.
What degree of technical expertise do you have to use something like this? I'm thinking of that mom and pop shop who kind of sits at the lower end and can't afford to have a full-time IT person. Is this something they could likely handle?
Maybe, like Shodan and such these platforms are relatively easy to set up. The problem comes once you get an email from them alerting you of an exposed service. How do you really make sense of that? How do you figure out what you're exposing here? I would hope that a company like this may have some IT person that is sort of managing some of that for them, even on a part-time basis or sort of as a managed service.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, money well spent, right? To know a person to have on call. All right, well, Johannes Ullrich, thanks so much for joining us. Thanks to all of our sponsors for making the CyberWire possible, especially our supporting sponsor, PlexTrack. PlexTrack, making cybersecurity teams more efficient, effective, and proactive. Learn more at plextrack.com/thecyberwire. And that's the CyberWire. For links to all of today's stories, check out our daily briefing at thecyberwire.com. The CyberWire podcast is proudly produced in Maryland out of the startup studios of Data Tribe, where they're co-building the next generation of cybersecurity teams and technologies. Our amazing CyberWire team is Liz Irvin, Elliot Peltzman, Trey Hester, Brandon Karp, Eliana White, Puru Prakash, Justin Sabi, Tim Nodar, Joe Kerrigan, Carol Terrio, Ben Yellen, Nick Valecki, Gina Johnson, Bennett Moe, Chris Russell, John Petrick, Jennifer Ivan, Rick Howard, Peter Kilpie, and I'm Dave Bittner. Thanks for listening. We'll see you back here tomorrow. And now, a word from our sponsor, Invicti. Your organization is building and updating business-critical web applications faster than ever, and with so much pressure to move fast, you may find yourself making trade-offs between innovation and security. Now you can build fast without sacrificing security, thanks to Invicti. Invicti is the application security platform that helps your dev, sec, and ops teams work together to secure every website, web app, and API, even if you have thousands. With unparalleled accuracy and automation, Invicti scales like no other AppSec solution. And with more than 50 integrations, Invicti slides into your workflows more smoothly than any other platform. Now you can innovate as fast as you want without compromising on security. Discover why many of the world's largest organizations innovate securely with Invicti. Visit i.invicti.com/cyberwire. And we thank Invicti for sponsoring our show.